The John Lebang Show has been known to make people laugh, sing, think, scream, throw things in rage, and generally lose their minds. Listener discretion is advised.
Worldwide and out to the greater universe, you're listening to the John Lebang Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the John Lebang Show. This month, we've got our good friend, Derek Shelmerdine, joining us from across the pond, and we're going to talk about a lot of rock and roll firsts. Derek, how are you doing, sir?
I'm very well. It's great to be talking to you again, John. We got some great firsts that all happened in August, up and down the years.
And we're starting off with American Bandstand, huh?
That's right. I mean, there are a couple of great TV debuts. And American Bandstand, the national debut, was on the 5th of August 1957. And the Chordettes and Billy Williams were on that. And it was transmitted for the first time on ABC TV. Because before that, it was actually Bob Horn's Bandstand. It had been that for about 5 years. That was launched in Philadelphia on a TV station called WFIL TV on the 7th of October 1952. So it had been going for quite a while. But the clean-cut image of Dick Clark sort of joined the show in July 1956 when he took over from Bob Horn, because Bob Horn was sacked basically for too much drink and doing naughty things, models-related incidents, I've seen it described as.
Oh, he's the first Me Too'er then.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the show itself was long-running for a music show. It went on till 1989, and Clark actually hosted it until the beginning of 99, when in season 32, he handed over to David Hirsch. But interestingly enough, I mean, the show itself finished at the end of that season, so it only ran for a matter of months after Dick Clark left.
Yeah, people identified the show with Dick Clark, and he was a man that really never aged through that whole time period. He really kept his looks about him, and he had a spunk that made him an icon in the music industry.
I mean, it's strange, really, because it was a very influential American TV show, and just about anybody was on the show.
Yeah, but people identified with Dick. And it, you know, certain shows you just cannot replace the host, like the John Lebang Show. You just can't replace him.
Absolutely true, John. Absolutely. But there's another great first as well on this side of the water. On the 9th of August, 63, Ready, Steady, Go debut. That was one of the premier, or probably the premier, early middle 60s show, and it really was the place to be seen and to go to. And it had a great slogan. The slogan beginning said, "The weekend starts here." I mean, the show kicked off at early evening, around 6 o'clock on a Friday. And that was great. It was originally, the first issue was introduced by Keith Fordyce and David Gell. It had Billy Fury, who sadly never made much of an impact in America, but he was a very, very popular British singer, actually from Liverpool. And he was one of the first wave British rock and roll singers. And the other people who were on were Brian Poole and the Tremolos. Now, they're the people who actually beat the Beatles to the audition at Decca. They both auditioned on the same day, and Decca Records decided that they preferred Brian Poole and the Tremolos to the Beatles.
And does he have any really popular music that I would know?
They did covers of American songs, a lot of the early stuff. Probably not. I mean, they weren't that successful either. I think they had a couple of minor hits in the British invasion in 64, 65.
Interesting. It's funny when you look back on history and you see the choices these companies make and how wrong they were sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, the Tremolos did go on to a reasonably successful solo career after they split from Brian Poole.
And the Rolling Stones appeared on there as well?
That's right. The Stones were on there in episode 3, and the Beatles, it wasn't until episode 9 that they were there. But the real star of the show was presenter Cathy McGowan. She joined in 64, and she was very much seen as the queen of the mods, because the whole opening credits, or a later set of opening credits, were very mod-based, with Parkers and Scooters and Union Jacks and the like. And the first set of music, though, was from the Safaris' Wipeout, which I think is a great tune. And that was actually recorded in PAL Recording Studios in Cucamonga. And that was the same PAL Studios that Frank Zappa bought. He worked there around the time of the Safaris recording, but in the summer of 64, he actually bought the studio as his first studio and called it Studio Z.
You're saying that's where he recorded a lot of his stuff?
Yeah, certainly in the early days. And he recorded a lot of other people as well, recorded a lot of doo-wop and all kinds of stuff there. What's interesting about Wipeout, I mean, it finally became a hit on the Dot label. And they put out an album called Wipeout with 12 tracks. But apart from Wipeout and its B-side, Surfer Joe, all the rest of the tracks were actually recorded by the Challengers, but they don't get any credit anywhere on the album.
It's an entirely different group, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. They were, they weren't just a bunch of studio musicians. They were another surf group called the Challengers. But for whatever reason, they don't get any credit, because apart from those 2 tracks, it's essentially a Challengers album.
That's weird.
Absolutely,
you would think they would have stuck up for themselves and said, hey, give us some credit here.
Yeah, obviously they got paid enough, or they liked the exposure. But the Wipeout theme itself, come to begin of 64, was replaced by Manfred Mann's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think that's a great song.
Yeah, definitely.
The Safaris and Brian Poole are still actually touring, but the Manfreds you can actually see on tour in the UK from the 9th of August to the 30th of November. And they've got some great original people there. You've got Mike Hug, Paul Jones, Tom McGuinness, and Mike Darbo, who replaced Paul Jones as the second lead singer.
So are they both doing the singing for the group?
That's right. They both appear. I think it might, if you look at their website, it says that sometimes the lineup may change. So it might be that sometimes Paul Jones is leading, sometimes Mike Darbo. But I know that some of the gigs, they both go out together, which would be a great gig.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see that.
Absolutely. And just a quick note here on the tours. All the links to the actual dates and venues and everything like that you can find on my website at www.rocknrollunraveled.com. So all the information there for anybody who really wants to check out the details of where to go and see these guys. It's all there. And
you're really great about putting out this information for the rest of us who, you don't have to do this, but it's a great little tool that you give us as consumers of music to go and find out who's touring right now, and maybe it comes to my town and I get to see somebody I didn't even know was coming unless I went to RocknRollUnraveled.com.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting as well, and it's fascinating to see that just about everybody who goes onto the list, because I do keep a page of everybody who's on tour, so bands from the 50s, well, not so much the 50s, 60s and 70s, where they are now, and almost all of them continue to just add dates on, so nobody ever comes off the list, basically.
That is incredible, because all these people are 60 plus years old, 70 years old, 80. I'm not sure if they're 80s, but I mean, some of these people who are touring have been doing this for 50 plus years.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of people on the road in this particular slot that we're going to be chatting about are in their 80s. Absolutely incredible. And legends as well. Absolute legends. But there's some great record labels as well who sort of kicked off in August up and down the years. On the 14th of August 1976, Stiff Records, one of the first real independent labels in the UK, great label, that had its debut single from its house producer, Nick Lowe. That was So It Goes. And it was founded by Jake Riviere and Dave Robinson, and very interesting label. But they had people like Motorhead, some of their early singles, and a whole range of different singles. But you can actually see Nick tour, who was one of the, he was the house producer and one of the stalwarts really of the label. And he's on tour in the USA and Canada from the 25th of September to the 11th of October. So
even he's busy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Andrew Oldham, the Rolling Stones' second manager, in the 20th of August 1965, he decided to launch his own label, Immediate Records, and he launched it with 3 singles, which I thought was a great way to do it. Mm-hmm. And one of them was the McCoys' Hang On Sloopy, under license from Bang Records. One of my all-time favourite songs, I think that.
Hang on, Sloopy, Sloopy, hang on.
Fabulous song. We used to play that when I was in a group in the 60s. So a lot of fun to play as a drummer. And Fifth Avenue, The Bells of Rimney, a popular song, is actually produced by Jimmy Page. And that sort of saw the light of day back in 1958 with Pete Seeger, first recording. And it was Seeger who set the words of Idris Davis's 1938 poem to music. And I mean, Dylan or loads of people have recorded The Bells of Rimney, another great song. And a pre-Velvet Underground Nico, actually produced by Andrew Oldham. She released I'm Not Saying. And those 3 constituted the first 3 singles out on the Immediate label.
And they grew to be a much bigger label as time went on, especially having Jimmy Page produce one of the songs.
I mean, he did an awful lot of session work and stuff before he got involved with Led Zeppelin and the Yardbirds.
He had an extensive career before he was into Zeppelin.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's on dozens, hundreds of session singles. Loads of hits he actually plays guitar on. And he is one of the real talents, I think, to come out of certainly British rock music.
And the McCoys are on tour.
Absolutely. I mean, that's great to see. They're in the UK from the 3rd of August to the 6th of April 2019. So they're all over the place. And Motown's got a great anniversary on the 21st of August 1961. They released Please Mr. Postman, the Marvelettes, and it gave Motown its first #1. That was actually the Marvelettes' first single. And they came to the label, interestingly enough, through a high school talent competition. But they only came 4th, but somehow they managed to persuade the good people at Motown that they had potential. Motown recognized that, released Please Mr. Postman, and had their first #1 with Marvin Gaye on the drums, believe it or not.
That's incredible.
Please Mr. Postman was famously covered by the Beatles on With the Beatles in the UK and Beatles' second album in America. And speaking of Marvin Gaye, he also plays drums on Stevie Wonder's first single, released on the 16th of August 62. And that's got a great title. I Call It Pretty Music, brackets, but old people call it the blues.
That was his first US single.
That's right. It grazed the charts, but he's on tour at the moment. So you can actually catch him across America from the 3rd of August to the 1st of September.
So it's a small 1-month tour. He's just getting in some gigs and making some money.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's great to see Marvin Gaye playing on both of those songs. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I had no idea he was that in depth as a musician to where he was actually playing drums. Are one of the hardest spots in a band, and especially when you're talking about recording, because your timing has got to be so perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a man of many talents, is Marvin Gaye.
Don't go anywhere now.
John will be right back right after this.
Yes, he will.
Check out the new book from Derek Shelmerdine,
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It tells the story of rock and roll from its roots right up until the mid-70s punk.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Not just the music, but also the events that shaped the music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It includes the backgrounds to recording sessions, singles, album releases, births and deaths, epic concerts, and festivals.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Shelmerdine has made a painstaking effort to document pretty much every event that would prove significant in shaping popular music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Purchase the book at www.rocknrollunraveled.com. Follow them at Twitter at R&R Unraveled, and look them up on Facebook at Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
By author Derek Shelmerdine.
Available now.
Hey, man, you're listening to the John Lebang Show, man.
The place where chronic brain cell rejuvenation happens.
Feel like you're getting any smarter yet?
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, no conversation about classic labels would be complete without Sam Phillips. Now, he's the guy that actually founded Sun Records, but a couple of years before that, on the 30th of August 1950, he released his first ever single, and that was with a one-man band called Joe Hill Louie, with a song called Gotta Let You Go, and a B-side of Boogie in the Park. But he was, when he released that, that first single, it was on a label called It's the Phillips, and he's a partner there with another guy called Phillips, no relation, who was the Memphis DJ Dewey Daddio Phillips, and that's the guy that famously played Elvis's That's All Right nonstop when that was first released.
Yeah, that was like for 24 hours or something, right? He just kept playing that song over and over?
That's right. People just kept ringing in and requesting it. And the Elvis legend wasn't really born because he didn't have a hit for a little while after that. But it's certainly where Elvis really started to find himself on the first rung of the first ladder of what turned out to be quite a successful career. But also Carl Perkins, who was a stalwart of the Sun label. On the 1st of August 55, he released his first single on Sun that was Let the Jukebox Keep on Playing. And interestingly enough, on the same day, Elvis released his last Sun single, I Forgot to Remember to Forget, which is one of those great titles.
And that's when you said that's his last one on that record. He went to a bigger label after that?
Yeah, he went to RCA. That was when shortly before that, the Colonel Tom Parker, he became Elvis's manager, and he negotiated a deal at RCA, and RCA took Elvis and the Sun Elvis back catalogue, and that was when Elvis Heartbreak Hotel was his first single, and that was that really was the start of the Elvis legend. He just success after success after success there.
Right. And then Carl Perkins, he had his first ever single, Movie Mag?
That's right. And what's interesting about that, it was on another Sam Phillips label called the Flip label. And shortly after that, he abandoned the Flip label because there was another Flip label. I think it was California, not 100% sure about that. But the owners of the other original Flip label, they contacted Sam Phillips and threatened to sue him if he put out any more records using the name of their record label.
Lots of drama in the music industry, I swear.
Absolutely. But Carl Perkins gave Sun their first million seller with Blue Suede Shoes. Sadly, none of those people are on the road. But Sun Records, believe it or not, Sun Records' biggest rock and roll star, Jerry Lee Lewis, he's playing again. And he's got a gig lined up on the 17th of February next year at the Peace Center in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah, and didn't he just finish a little bit of a tour just recently too?
That's right. He was in Florida at the Strawberry Festival, and that goes on for about a week. And each day they have an afternoon session and an evening session, and they have major artists headlining each of those days. And he played one of those gigs. So I mean, he doesn't gig a lot, but I mean, the guy's in his mid-80s, and he's still out and about. In fact, I saw a video of the Florida concert. It was best part of an hour long, and it was great.
He's had such an interesting career. It's fascinating, really, with the ups and downs early on there. He was getting big, and then all the hoopla over his marriage, and then everything from there on. Just that guy really, it's surprising that he's still going at this age.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he was, without doubt, Sun Label's biggest rock and roll star. But then when he came over for his British tour, it was discovered that the young lady with him was the 13-year-old daughter of his bass-playing cousin and also his wife. And the fans in the UK and America took a very dim view of this, deserted him in droves. So his rock and roll career nosedived around that. It was February 58, I think. And shortly afterwards, he reinvented himself as a country music star. And he's got, if you look at country music charts, he's got dozens of hits across the years. He really did reinvent himself very successfully.
Right, and I would say what he was doing originally wasn't that far from country style, with the piano and everything. So it probably wasn't a huge transition for him.
No, exactly, and he's got his roots in gospel as well. I mean, he did go to religious college for about a term to train to be a preacher, but apparently he got thrown out for playing hymns to a boogie-woogie rhythm.
Little known fact about me, I was supposed to be a priest. The family was grooming me to be a priest. It was girls that pretty much got me thrown out, so,
Well, the world's a sadder place for it, John.
That's right.
Or a better place, whichever way you look at it.
It's probably sadder. Anyways, then we got some first records.
That's right, some great singles. Cliff Richard and his band, they call themselves the Drifters. Originally, they became the Shadows later. They've got the 60th anniversary of their first single. That was the 29th of August, 1958. And originally, it's an interesting one because originally it was going to be Schoolboy Crush, a Bobby Helms cover from 1958, on the A side, and a side written by Ian Samwell, one of the band, Move It, on the B side. But apparently the producer's daughter, Norrie Paramore, she raved about the B side, and Jack Good, who was a major TV promoter, he wanted to have Move It on his show, Oh Boy. So they like a lot of songs, the original A side got flipped, and Move It became the A side. And apparently it was recorded in just 2 takes, 20 minutes. And Cliff Richard liked to play because he played guitar, a bit like Elvis, a lot like Elvis, in fact, in the 50s. But he liked to play guitar while he was singing. And he wasn't required at all to play guitar on the recording, but Norrie Paramore, the producer, allowed Cliff to hold on to his guitar, a bit like a comfort blanket, I guess.
And that, that was incredible back then. Something we don't get these days is you just said he recorded this in 2 takes, and it was done. These days, you're in for one song. It could take weeks to finish these days.
Absolutely. I mean, in those days, certainly in the 50s when this was recorded, they were essentially live recordings because they were mostly one track. And essentially, what happened was the band played live in the studio, and they might have a couple of takes, they might do a little bit of splicing, but as you say, there really wasn't a lot of editing going on.
These guys back then, I think, were just really good musicians. And they were used to having to do something in 1 or 2 takes, so they became masters of their craft. That's why we got really great music at the time, because all these musicians in this 30, 40-year period really had to get things done, especially the early guys, in 1 or 2 takes, because that's all you would get. You couldn't just overdub for weeks.
Absolutely, and there weren't that many recording studios. Studio time was expensive. And it all happened very quickly and produced some great music.
Definitely. And it wasn't, I think it really was the Beatles and Pink Floyd and bands like that really introduced the massive overdubbing and the big orchestrated this and that you could go in and do a couple takes. And that was later towards the end of the Beatles' career more than the beginning, because in the beginning they were very much the same way. You just go in, play your song, and you better get that right.
Absolutely. I think they recorded their first, well, what was the first British album, Please Please Me? I think that was recorded in a day or a couple of days at most. Absolutely incredible. But what happened was, as far as Pepper, the Pepper was recorded on 2 4-track machines, so the technology wasn't that great. And one of the problems they had, of course, is if you started doing clever things in the studio, then they couldn't reproduce it on the road because the road technology was even more basic than the studio technology. So there was a combination of having to make sure that they could promote the recordings, because they were mostly singles. Albums didn't become popular until the sort of mid-'60s. It was really the rock era that sort of mid-'66, '67 that really brought the album to its fore. So people out on the road had to be able to reproduce what they were doing in the studio.
Now, Cliff, he had a lot of good talented musicians on the stuff we were just talking about, right?
That's right. I mean, there were a couple of the band, Terry Smart, the drummer, and Ian Samwell, who was actually the lead guitarist with Cliff Richard's band. But they had a couple of session musicians, Frank Clark on double bass, and Ernie Shear is the lead guitarist. So the amazing lead guitar you hear on Move It is a guy called Ernie Shear.
Now, you may have to explain to people what double bass is, because double bass back then is a lot different than today's double bass where it's 2 kick drums.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, this is what morphed into the bass guitar. This is one of the largest instruments in an orchestra, and it's essentially the bass, string bass, and it was upright, and it stood 6 foot. It was as tall as the guy playing it. And if you watch people like Bill Haley on old videos, some of these bass players are really entertaining, because they would stand on the bass. It was essentially shaped like a very, very large
cello
violin.
Right.
So it sort of went in the center, and it was obviously it wasn't. Well, in those days, it wasn't electrified, so it was just an acoustic instrument.
Exactly, and you see a lot of these guys playing this instrument and be spinning it and dancing around it, because it was like 6 foot tall, right? It was pretty tall. It was a 5 foot, 6 foot instrument.
Absolutely. So it was a great one from a performance point of view, and some of these bass players are very entertaining to watch.
And Cliff is on tour.
That's right. He's got a UK tour going on from the 4th to the 20th of October. So plenty of chance to see him again. I mean, the Shadows themselves have stopped touring. His backing band on this was the Drifters, but they changed that to avoid the name of confusion with the American vocal group of the same name, and they became the Shadows. But interesting enough, I mean, there's another great single from the Small Faces. Their first single, released on the 6th of August, 65, What You Gonna Do About It? And that was with the original organist, Jimmy Wilson, before Ian McLagan joined. But that was actually written and produced by Ian Samwell, who we've just been talking about as Cliff Richard's guitarist. Dick Dale, that's right, legendary guitarist Dick Dale. Now, he was born in 1937. He's one of these guys that's 81 years old now. And he recorded a track called Let's Go Tripping on the 23rd of August, 1961. And that's usually cited as the first surf rock record, because the Beach Boys' Surfing, originally it was released on a small label called Candix before they got their Capitol deal around the end of 61. So he predated them. What's interesting about him is he was a left-handed guy, played right-handed guitar without restringing it.
So he played upside down?
That's essentially it. He eventually did get a left-handed guitar, but he started off playing it upside down, basically.
So the strings were backwards. Even like Tony Iommi, he plays left-handed, but the strings are in the same order. You're saying he's playing a completely flipped-over guitar.
Yeah, when he started playing, recording this sort of time, that's exactly what he was doing. Probably gives him his distinctive sound. That
would have been confusing. I'm left-handed, and I just learned how to play the damn right-handed guitar for the hell of it. Right. And in fact, we're going to switch off guitars for a minute, because you know me, I take us on the detours real quick. I think the right-handed guitar should be a left-handed guitar because all your fingering is on your left hand. But that's just
right.
me.
That's right. That's always fascinated me about guitars, and it seems to be the wrong way around somehow.
Whoever created the left-right on guitar was a little confused, in my opinion.
Absolutely. We'll have to do a session on guitarists one of these days.
Oh yeah. Oh, we could spend 2, 3, 4 hours. It'd be like last month's best 100 albums. There's just so much to talk about.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you missed that, go to the archives. You can go to either Derek's website, rocknrollunraveled.com, or you can go to jlebang.com, and you can find that archive on either site.
Absolutely.
And
parts 1 and 2.
Right. That was a 2-hour session. We went into overtime, Derek.
Absolutely.
Don't move a muscle. The John Lebang Show is right back.
With lots of fun and excitement. Yes. Pane in the Glass, commercial and residential window cleaning for a beautiful sparkling shine that's crystal clear. Call Pane in the Glass Window Cleaning. You can find them on Facebook at Pane in the Glass.
Hey, man, it's at the bottom of the hour, man. Do you know where your kids are, man?
If you want to contact the John Lebang Show, feel free to send an email to jlebang@live.com. And if you're on Twitter, look him up at John Lebang. And don't forget to go to his Facebook page at The John Lebang Show. Now here's John.
Dick Dale's on tour.
That's right, 3rd of August to the 20th of December. You can see him across America. Towards the end of the tour, most of it's in California. But up until then, he's actually across quite a lot of America as well. So that's great. One of the Mersey beat bands, the Foremost, they released their first single on the 30th of August, 63. That was Hello Little Girl. Now, that's a Lennon McCartney song, and actually it was produced by George Martin. So they were very much in the same camp there. And that was one of the songs that the Beatles played at the aforementioned Decca audition on the 1st of January 62 when they lost out to Brian Poole. But you can't hear the Beatles version on their Anthology 1 album. But it's got an interesting history, Hello Little Girl, because Jerry and the Pacemakers, another major Mersey beat band of the early middle 60s, they recorded Hello Little Girl as a possible follow-up to their second number one, I Like It. And they were famous because their first 3 singles went into the charts at number 1 in 63. That was I Like It, How'd You Do It, and You Never Walk Alone. You Never Walk Alone, of course, became the anthem of Liverpool Football Club.
Interesting. You know, it's always fascinating to me when rock and roll was really young, how many artists would copy or cover a tune and record it and use it as their own. And you don't see that as much these days, but back then it was prevalent.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at British music in the skiffle and British rock and roll in the 50s, that was virtually all, very significant part of it was covers of American R&B and blues songs.
Jerry and the Pacemakers had their farewell tour in 2017, eh?
Yeah, sadly, there's no more opportunity to see Jerry and the Pacemakers. But the Foremost, they're on tour all the time, and mostly in the UK. They've got some Irish gigs coming up as well. And they've got gigs listed from the 4th of August right through to December 2019. One of the reasons I wanted to include them, as well as the fact that particular song's got a great history, is that on the 7th of August 1957, the Quarrymen with John Lennon played their first gig at the Cavern. Now, the Quarrymen were, the band that eventually became the Beatles. But interestingly enough, the Beatles played at the Cavern after they moved on from being the Quarrymen. But the Foremost actually beat them to it by about 3 weeks. The Foremost, calling themselves the 4Js at that time, they actually played at the Cavern before the Beatles did.
Interesting.
It was never a foregone conclusion that the Beatles would become, the premier Mersey beat band, but I mean, that's a very long story. But the Cavern itself started off as a jazz club, And the owner, Alan Sittner, he really was not a fan of rock and roll at all. He tolerates skiffle. Now, the Quarrymen were essentially a skiffle band, but at that gig on the 7th of August, they edged into the world of Elvis Presley and rock and roll, played a couple of Elvis songs, Hound Dog and Blue Suede Shoes. But Sittner sent them a note to Lennon on stage, and the note told him to literally cut out the bloody rock. Oh, dear. Nobody's ever actually seen that note, but it is widely reported.
Paul McCartney was a member of that band, right?
That's right. He was a member at the time that the Quarrymen played there, but he missed that gig because he was away at Boy Scout camp.
That's why John was playing the rock and roll. Paul would have kept him in line, and John said, "Yeah, I'm a rebel. Let's play something different."
Exactly. But they had their last appearance actually in August as well, on the 3rd of August, 1963. And they had 292 appearances.
Oh, boy.
But a band very few people have heard of, the Hideaways, they actually hold the club record with 412 appearances.
And the first Cavern appearance for the Beatles was February 9th, 1961, eh?
That's right. Yeah, when they came back from Hamburg, because they changed their name to the Beatles in the August when they went. That's when Pete Best joined, and they went off to Hamburg. So the first gig they played with the name The Beatles was actually in Hamburg. So when they came back and they played at the Cavern again, they played there as the Beatles, and that was George's Cavern debut.
Right, George just got into the band more, recently around that time.
He joined shortly after Paul McCartney. He was actually Paul's friend, and John was a little bit concerned that George was that much younger than them. I think he was about 15 then. They were sort of 16 going on 17.
So much younger.
That's a big difference at that. But when John heard George play, he thought, "Oh wow, we'll have some of this," and he came in as the lead guitarist. So he was in the band for quite a while, and then they never really had a regular drummer. They never really, in the early days, I mean the days of the Quarrymen in the sort of late 50s, you don't often find bass guitarists. Well, the bass guitar didn't really arrive until the sort of late 50s. So you tend to have three guitarists. So because Paul played guitar right up until this sort of time. It was when they went to Hamburg, and the guy who'd become their bass guitarist, Stu Sutcliffe, he stayed on in Hamburg because he'd found a new girlfriend. So when they came back and started playing gigs in the UK, they really needed a bass guitarist. So that was when Paul moved over to bass guitar.
And he played it a lot like a guitar. If you've watched some of the old videos, you can see he's picking away instead of fingering it most of the time.
Yeah. Oh, he's a great bass guitarist, I think. And
Ringo's on tour.
Absolutely. I mean, Ringo's been on tour for a while now. He's got the last leg in America, 1st to the 29th of September. But it's great to see Paul McCartney's back on tour. He's calling this tour the Freshen Up Tour, which I think is quite a nice name. And you can see him across Canada, Poland, and the UK, 17th of September to December.
And he's going to be in Austin as well, right?
That's right. The Austin City Limits Festival seems to be over a couple of weekends, and he's listed as playing there on the between the 5th and 7th of October and the 12th and 14th of October.
So you're going to have two chances here in the U.S. to see him. Otherwise, if you're in Poland, the UK, or Canada, you can see him from September all the way to December. So that's pretty good. Absolutely.
But I think I'd be very surprised if more dates weren't added to these as well, because, I mean, that's quite a gap between October and December there. And I think he'll be putting additional dates in. I think he'll play a lot more gigs in America before this tour's up.
Speaking of touring and concerts, Cream's official debut concert was July 31st, 1966.
Oh, absolutely. At the 6th National Jazz and Blues Festival in Windsor, which is just outside, just west of London. And they appeared with people like Georgie Fame, And, I mean, they really did come from a heck of a background. I mean, Eric Clapton actually played with Jack Bruce in John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and Jack Bruce played with Ginger Baker in both Alexis Corner's Blues Incorporated and the Graham Bond organization. Now, they never really got on, surprisingly enough. And it's very much alleged that Baker pulled a knife once on Jack Bruce and suggested his time in the Graham Bond organization should be coming to an end. And Jack Bruce went off and joined Manfred Mann. And so that's where he joined Cream from. Clapton at the time was in John Mayall's Blues Breakers. Ginger Baker was still with Graham Bond organization, and Jack Bruce had joined Manfred Mann for a brief time. You can find he plays bass on Pretty Flamingo, is the only single he plays on. So if you're a sort of Cream completist, you need Manfred Mann's Pretty Flamingo in your collection.
It's fascinating how often Ginger Baker's name comes up when we do these discussions every month, and he seems to be involved in a lot of different things, or was back in the day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they were just such a fundamental part of the first half of the 60s and way beyond. And Clapton, you can actually see him. Well, you can see him if you're in New York on the 6th and 7th of October. He's playing at the Madison Square Garden.
With Gary Clark Jr.
That's right. I mean, he is one heck of a guitarist. I was listening to some of his albums a few days ago. Absolutely incredible stuff.
And Clapton's in his 70s, right?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Just amazing that he still can play at a great level at that age. You know, it gives us hope, us people who are still not there yet. You're like, wow, we can still be rocking out when we're older.
And one of the other prog bands that came together, 50th anniversary actually, on the 40th of August 1968, they played their debut performance at the East Mercia Youth Camp in Essex, just north of London. That was John Anderson, Chris Squire, Tony Kaye, Peter Banks, and Bill Bruford. And that was the final lineup of Mabel Greer's Toy Shop, which was the name of the band that morphed at that point into Yes.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
Because the John Lebang Show will be right back
After this. That's guaranteed. Yes. Quality One Painting. For interior and exterior painting needs, call Tom at Quality One, 313-982-2986. Tom will give you free estimates, senior discounts, and I can tell you from meeting the gentleman, he's one of the nicest guys on the face of the planet. So for a quality paint job with a professional attitude, call Tom at Quality One Painting. That's 313-982-2986. 313-982-2986. Quality One Painting. You're listening to the John Lebang Show.
Join the radio revolution right here.
It's better than some good Thai stick, man.
Yes, I would like some too. You brought up 67. In August the 13th, that was the first gig for Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac.
Absolutely. And that was at the Windsor Jazz Festival as well, but a different year. And that was Peter Green, Jeremy Spencer, Mick Fleetwood. And the bass player, funnily enough, was a guy called Bob Brunning. John McVie was still with John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and that's where Mick Fleetwood had come from. And he hadn't managed to persuade John McVie to leave the sort of security of John Mayall. So Bob Brunning became the first bass player until he was there for several months, and he actually recorded some, or appears on some of the early recordings. But I mean, John McVie did replace him not soon after this particular gig. It's just as well, really, because Fleetwood Mac, I mean, John McVie is the Mac in Fleetwood Mac. So it's just as well he joined the band eventually.
And they're coming up on a tour.
Oh, absolutely. They're in America. 3rd of October through 5th of April next year. But the lineup on this tour is incredible. It's Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, Stevie Nicks, and Christine McVie. Absolutely incredible. I mean, they're a really interesting band. I mean, they came very much out of the late 60s British blues scene. But they slowly but surely sort of crossed over into a much more mainstream style and became commercially very, very successful, and still are, of course.
Emerson, Lake, and Palmer had their first gig in 70.
Oh, that's absolutely. 25th of August 1970, really prog rock's first supergroup, really. I mean, if you look at where the lineup came from, keyboard player Keith Emerson, he'd previously been with the Nice. Greg Lake, bassist and vocalist, he was with a band called The Gods and King Crimson. Now, The Gods was actually founded by Ken Hensley, who went on to found Uriah Heep, and Mick Taylor, who went on to replace Brian Jones in the Stones. So that had a fair pedigree. Carl Palmer, the drummer, he was with Chris Farlow's Thunderbirds, Crazy World of Arthur Brown, and he was a founding member of Atomic Rooster. What's great about this is 4 days after this band got together, they played to best part of 500,000 people at the Isle of Wight festival.
I mean, how often does that happen for a band that's been together 4 days?
They must have been. Their reputation must have preceded them.
Really, you're lucky to get a gig of 20 people that soon in your career, and here they're 500,000. I mean, that must have been intimidating.
Oh, I was lucky enough to be at that particular festival. That's the Jimi Hendrix Isle of Wight festival, and I mean I remember Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They were awesome. They played Pictures and Exhibition, and nobody was playing that kind of music at that time. I mean, it was a straight classical piece. Absolutely awesome. They
had a small lineup change in like the 80s where Carl Palmer left, or he wasn't part of the band, and they had Cozy Powell playing drums. But Carl Palmer is on tour right now.
That's right. And he's called his tour Carl Palmer's ELP Legacy Tour. And that's across UK, Italy, Germany, and America, 7th of August to the 12th of October. So that would be a great concert to go to.
Hawkwind. Their first concert was in 1969.
That's right, August the 29th. And they actually played that particular concert as they called themselves Group X. They changed the name to Hawkwind shortly after that. And apparently this was a 20-minute jam. So I should imagine it was pretty unmemorable. But what is interesting, it was at the All Saints Hall in Notting Hill. And that was quite a famous venue at the time. I mean, Pink Floyd regularly played there. So in the sort of late 60s, that was one of the premier places to play at in London. And Dave Brock was in that original lineup.
And shortly after that, that's when they changed their name to Hawkwind, right?
That's right. And, I mean, they're one of these bands that's had loads and loads and loads of different people through the ranks, including Ginger Baker was with them shortly.
He's in everything.
I know. I can't remember which album it is now, but there's an album called something like Leviathan, and I think that's the album that Ginger Baker's on. But he is, I mean, what a star that guy is. One of my drumming heroes. And they're on tour. You can see them in UK, Spain, and then back to the UK, 4th of August to the 25th of November. But they've got this interesting week in Ibiza, which is Party Central, one of the Spanish islands, from the 8th to the 15th of May 2019. So that'll be an interesting one to be at.
Now, you say Ibiza is a Party Central? I have to claim ignorance. I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, it's one of the notorious islands that Brits tend to go to, young Brits tend to go to get extremely drunk and make many new friendships.
Oh, it's Florida for the U.S. That's it. I get it.
Yeah. In fact, the local council are trying to crack down on some of the more extreme goings on there of boozing and, sexual activity, basically. But it would be a great place to see Hawkwind.
Up next, we got a lot of first recording sessions.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. This is the Drifters. This is the very famous American vocal group. They actually had their first recording session with a second lineup on the 9th of August, 53. Why that's much more important than the first lineup, and it's got quite a strange story, really. 6 weeks earlier, about the 29th of June, 53, the first lineup had the recording session. Because what had happened, Clyde McPhatter had just been recruited to Atlantic Records to form, with a remit to form a group. So he pulled in what was essentially the Mount Lebanon Gospel Singers with a guy called David Bourne. as the lead singer. They recorded a couple of tracks, and the good people at Atlantic thought they were rubbish, basically, so said, "Well, go away and try again." So he did, and he got together with Bill Pinkney, the Thrasher brothers, Andrew and Gerhardt, and a bass singer called Willie Furby, and they recorded "Money Honey." And now this was put out as their first single. So you've got to bear in mind this is their second recording session that resulted in the first single, and that gave them an R&B top 40 that spent 11 weeks at number one. The Drifters took a while before they were successful in the UK. They didn't have their first UK hit for another 7 years with Dance With Me in 1960. But the story gets really involved with the Drifters. And in June 58, George Treadwell, who was the manager, sacked the whole group. And what had happened is when Clyde McPhatter got called up to serve in the US Army, he sold his share of the group to George Treadwell, so Treadwell owned the name. And he replaced them with the Crowns. They were both playing in Harlem at a club there for a week. And at the end of that week, he sacked the Drifters, recruited the Crowns, whose lead singer was Benny King, and he renamed them the Drifters. So they became the Drifters. But where the story gets even more convoluted is that Bill Pinkney, who was in that original lineup on Money Honey, he then decided, well, I'm going to call myself the original Drifters, and he went off and recruited David Bourne, who'd been the lead singer with the Mount Lebanons, who were at that first recording session, and the Thrasher brothers, Andrew and Gerhardt. And he called them the original Drifters, and they actually won a lawsuit to keep that particular name. And if you can imagine, with that lineup, Bourne, Pinkney, and the Thrasher brothers, they had more right to perform as the Drifters than the Benny King group. That really became the way of the Drifters. There have been so many different bands. In late 71, Charlie Thomas, who was a later lead singer with the group, he broke off and formed his own Drifters group. But in 72, because what happened to the Drifters in America, their commercial success died away in the late 60s. But in 1972, they relocated with Faye Treadwell, who's the daughter of George, the original manager, to the UK. They generated what was the third generation of the Drifters, and they had a lot of success in the UK in the 70s. And they've different lineups, obviously. They've had reputedly 60-odd people through the various lineups of the Drifters. But they're on tour of the UK at the moment from the 3rd of August to the 23rd of November.
Sounds like they're the band that's had the most different iterations of the lineup.
I mean, they've had about 7 or 8, maybe more, lead singers, defining a lead singer as somebody who's, had a hit record. They've had so many different lead singers. People tend to associate Benny King as the main lead singer, but he was only with them for a couple of years, 3 or 4, or maybe 5 hits.
August 13th, 1954, one of my favorites, Mr. Chuck Berry.
Oh, absolutely. He made his first ever recording on the 13th of August 54. But he was a member of Joe Alexander and the Cubans. I Hope These Words Will Find You Well, coupled with Oh Maria, were the 2 songs they recorded and put out as a single on the small ballad label in America. But it's just interesting to see that Chuck Berry started out in the early part of the 50s, but at that time, before he found personal success, he was playing in a Latin band.
Chuck Berry is so influential, not just in his guitar style, but Angus Young copied the duck walk. Now you saved the best for last, Derek.
David Bowie. Now he had his first ever recording on the 30th of August, 63. It's the 55th anniversary of that. We tend to think of Bowie very much, he was very big much later, but he was part of a band called the Conrads. As well as singing, he played saxophone, but he was called David Jones at that time, and they recorded I Never Dreamed. But I thought it'd be really interesting to just have a quick look at the Space Oddity story. It's a major part of Bowie's career, but he was so nearly just a one-hit wonder. He tried for success in so many different bands. I mean, Space Oddity itself actually started out in a recording around the January '69. It was for a 30-minute promo film called Love You Till Tuesday, and that was designed to, get out to various people who matter, to get Bowie to a wider audience. The soundtrack itself wasn't released until '84, and it was released on Derham. Just to put Space Oddity into perspective, it was released in the UK on the 11th of July '69, and it entered the UK charts a couple of months later on the 6th of September. It got to number 5, and then Bowie, he just fell off the radar screen again. But if you look at it, how he tried across the 60s with multiple bands, so many singles, it's incredible. I just mentioned the Conrads when it all started. He was in the King Bees, the Manish Boys, and then the 16th of September '65, he decided to change his name from Davy Jones to David Bowie. Didn't want to be confused with the monkey, David Jones, and he was inspired by the Alamo frontiersman legend, Jim Bowie. And then after that, he was in more bands. David Bowie in the Lower Third, David Bowie in the Buzz. He was in the Riot Squad, and one of the founding members of that was Mitch Mitchell. He was in a sort of arty, mimey theatre group called Turquoise, later became Feathers. And around this time now, he released 6 singles on Vocalation Pop, Parlophone and Pie, and 3 singles on Derham. So he released 9 singles before Space Oddity. He had a couple of albums. His first album was on the Derham label in '67 called David Bowie. And then, interestingly enough, he moved to Philips 1969, released his second album, also called David Bowie. And that's the one that contained the Space Oddity song. So on the 6th of September '69, Space Oddity entered the charts, and it actually featured Rick Wakeman on keyboards. To all intents and purposes, he fell from the scene again. So before his first really big hit in the UK, which what established him, was Starman. But that wasn't until mid-1973, so it's a good 3-4 years away. And he was in more bands. He tried out with, he put a band called Hype together. What's useful about them is that was first time with Mick Ronson, and they were performing as Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Well, I say performing, they weren't known by that name yet, but the lineup that became Ziggy Stardust, mid-71. And then he had 3 more singles on Mercury, another one on RCA. He had 2 albums which didn't bother the charts at all. The Man Who Sold the World and Hunky Dory. And then the story started for him. He started the climb to fame. 5th of May 1972, he released Starman off the Ziggy Stardust album, and it began his run of hits. He had sort of 70 plus in the UK. But just to finish the Space Oddity story, it's continued to be a major part of him. 24th of February 1973, it entered the Billboard Top 40. It gave him his first American hit. It only got to number 15, but it was another 2 years before Young Americans was a hit for him in America in 1975. And it's not over in the UK for Space Oddity either. On the 11th of October 75, it entered the UK charts, and believe it or not, it gave Bowie his first UK number 1. So Space Oddity is a really interesting story, and Bowie was so nearly a one-hit wonder.
So it took several years for it to catch on in the US, it sounds like.
Absolutely. He didn't have anything like the number of hit singles in the US either that he had in the UK. In the UK, he had, depends how you count them and which numbers you work from, but certainly, he's in the sort of 70 region in the UK, but much more like 20, maybe 25 in America.
Well, Derek, you want to give everybody your social media?
You can find me on Facebook at RocknRoll Unraveled, and Twitter at RNR Unraveled, and the website, lots of stuff, is www.rocknrollunraveled.com.
Awesome. Derek, I thank you so much for joining me this month.
I really enjoyed chatting to you.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers, mate.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff. Tune in again next week. Same time, same space, same station.